guidelines when you want to select your vocabulary words. Now, when I get into these, at first you're going to be like, well, it's kind of common sense, and a lot of it does sound like it, um, but which is really good if you. But at the same time, these are guidelines that's been proven that is effective. So it makes it a little bit easier when we already think it's common sense. But we'll elaborate on those in just a little bit more. So the first guideline is select words that are unknown. Okay, that's a little bit obvious, but sometimes curriculum, they have, like going back to the science lesson earlier or the math lesson, sometimes they will have words listed as a vocabulary and they already know what they are. And then, so the words that they already know, you want to, touch on them, introduce them, but then you don't want to spend your time on that and you want to move on. And again, it's when you know your students and know which words those are going to be. So, like for example, a fourth grade reading text listed the word secret as a vocabulary instructional word. So by fourth grade, pretty much all students have had an experience and know what a secret is. So you're not going to spend a lot of instructional time going over the word secret. So you're going to shift that over to words that they don't know. So the next one is select words that are important to understanding a passage or unit. And so vocabulary is implemented to improve the student's understanding of a passage. We talked about yesterday, if a student can read fluently, but the vocabulary development is not really there, they can read and know what that word says, but do they really know what that means? And if they don't, then that interferes with their comprehension. And it's not only in language arts, but also in other content areas as well, especially in other content areas. And so therefore the importance of the word should be considered. For example, excuse me, if you are reading a story and the word contagious is important for them to know, to have the underlying meaning for that meaning of the passage, to know what that passage is talking about, then you're going to make sure that they understand what contagious is. Or if you have a science chapter that focuses on photosynthesis, then you want to make sure that they know what photosynthesis means before you continue on. But then there may be other words in that chapter, in the science chapter, like flower, that you don't need to spend time on. That's what that's talking about. Or also, if there's a word in there that it's not going to change if that kid's going to understand what they're talking about or not, then you just don't even worry about talking to it, providing your instruction for that. And the third one is select words that students will hear, read, write, and say in the future. And we've already talked about that, but that's the big one that we want to focus on with our kids, because you guys know even kids that don't technically have an attention deficit disorder, if it's something that's hard for them or that's not really something that they enjoy, then their attention is going to be very limited. So again, you want to bombard them with things that's going to be the most beneficial for them. All words have different tiers: tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So generally speaking, tier 1 words are common words that pretty much everybody knows. They're high frequency. We use them a lot. Tier 2, they're referred to as like general academic vocabulary words. Kids may not necessarily know a tier 2 word specifically, but they could maybe compare a tier 1 word to that one. For example, they may know the word angry, they know what angry is. That would be a tier 1. But the word furious, they may kind of know that they might be a little mad, but not fully comprehend what the word furious would be. So furious would be considered a tier 2 word, for example. And then lastly, your tier 3 words are typically low frequency and content specific. So, for example, the word photosynthesis is specific to science. That would be considered a tier 3 word because most people in general conversation is not going to be talking about photosynthesis. And again, and that would depend on your lesson, depending on your students. The word selection may vary. That would fall into a tier 1, a tier 2, and tier 3. And the last one for your guidelines in selecting it is selecting words that are difficult to learn and need interpretation. You're going to use your instructional time for the words that students have difficulty learning. And again, that sounds like common sense, but some factors that would cause the increase in difficulty for words would be words that's not adequately addressed through context clues, because especially by middle school, even though our kids are not functioning on grade level, they have been exposed to trying to use their context clues to figure out word meanings. And when we talked about inferencing yesterday, sometimes our kids, they are good at being able to, if it's written in that text, many kids can go and find, oh, here, this word means this because it's right there in the text, and they're using those context clues. But sometimes, as we know, some words are in our text and they don't have context clues. So those may be some vocabulary words that you might need to spend some time on. And words that are related to abstract concepts rather than concrete. And again, that goes back to that visual piece. If it's hard to create a visual for a word that's abstract, so that will be very difficult for a kid to be able to make that connection if they don't have a visual to refer it to. And then last is words that are difficult to pronounce and that they require additional interpretation. And words that's going back to the being able to difficult to pronounce the word. It could be that they don't know how to pronounce it. It could be that words are spelled irregularly and they're not phonetically spelled. And then also you have kids or even adults, there's words that is physically, hard to form because the letters, I was trying to think when I was doing this, because I know there's words that I have a hard time saying. So, if it's hard to say, they're not going to use it. And, I wouldn't either. So those are the words you want to, if those words fall in that category that you feel are important for them to know, then that's where you're going to spend your time having them with your instruction and having them practice those. And one thing that, and this is something for all teachers, K through 12, is you never assume that students know how to pronounce a word. So when we are presenting the word, the vocabulary word, and tell what that word is, then we would have them pronounce it back and even practice that word several times.